Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Austin Pollock. The headlines at the top of the hour here on 6 News. The crew on board a submarine that went missing while exploring the Titanic in the Atlantic Ocean are now estimated to have just 20 hours of oxygen remaining. Comes after yesterday that the Coast Guard in Boston confirmed that underwater banging had been detected near the wreckage of the Titanic.
You always have hope. That's why we're doing what we do. With respect to the noises specifically, we don't know what they are, to be frank with you. The P3 detected noises. That's why they're up there. That's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why they put sonar buoys in the water. The good news is, what I can tell you is we're searching in the area where the noises were detected.
The search area is now 3 times the size of Sydney and stretches 4 kilometres below water level. A parliamentary committee has found that PwC engaged in a multi-year cover-up to hide the breach of confidentiality in their tax leak saga. It's reported that the company leaked internal Treasury advice. Jim Chalmers has told ABC Radio it's a deeply disappointing breach of trust and completely unacceptable.
I mean, people are filthy about this for good reason, and they want to see the maximum amount of effort to get to the bottom of it, to make sure that there is a price paid.
Queensland has won the second State of Origin game at Suncorp Stadium, meaning they have also won the 2023 series. Their first victory came in Adelaide. Last night, it was a 32-6 win over New South Wales. And Melbourne has once again claimed a podium spot on the world's most livable cities index, conducted by Economist Intelligence Unit, finishing on 3rd place, just 1 place in front of Sydney. You can see all the places there on your screen at the moment where they finished. Alright, and those are the latest headlines up to the minute here on 6 News. As always, there's more news 24/7 on our website, SIXNewsAU.com, and our social media, just search 6NewsAU to find us. Thanks folks so much for your company. Up next is Question Time live from the House of Reps in Canberra, and we'll have the latest headlines for you straight after that. For now though, I'm Austin Pollock. We'll see you soon.
Chamber are familiar with these scenarios that are coming more often and with more intensity around the world. I am so proud, as all Australians should be, that there are currently on the ground 364 Australian firefighters and incident management specialists, and that additional crews of 124 are preparing to leave in coming days. These Australians come from every single state as well as from the ACT, and they are making an enormous difference on the ground. I say to the Australians, please keep yourself safe. We know that in 2019-20, not only did so many Australians lose their life, of course American firefighters who are here to assist lost their life as well. So to our firefighters, we say we are proud of you. We return a favour that now we do with our friends. Canada, of course, provided 100 firefighters here during that summer of 2019-2020. We spoke this morning with Prime Minister Trudeau about, as I have had these discussions with President Biden as well, about increasingly with climate change leading to more intense and more frequent events, we're going to have these exchanges more and more, most tragically. But we say to our firefighters, thank you, you do our nation proud.
I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I associate the opposition with the Prime Minister's fine words and send our very best thoughts, wishes and prayers to those who are fighting in our country's name on behalf of Australians alongside their brothers and sisters in Canada at the moment. Australia is renowned around the world for those men and women who wear the uniform of our Australian Defence Force, but there are those paramedics, those firefighters, those police officers who are quite often deployed internationally to hotspots, to difficult in our region, right across the world, because of the reputation that they've earned over a long period of time. The training that's done conjointly, the shared values that we have with a country like Canada come to the fore in an hour of need. And Canada knows, and no doubt Prime Minister Trudeau would have conveyed this to you, Prime Minister, that when Canada is in need of help, we stand up and provide that help to her, as Canada has on so many occasions to us. So we say to the families of those Australian firefighters who are deployed at the moment that this will be a period of anxiety for you, and for those colleagues who are left behind, they will be worrying about the safety of those officers who are fighting these fires in Canada. So we wish them every success, Godspeed, and may they return safely, quickly, and no doubt will provide support to the Canadians to save life and property in their quest there.
We'll move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, your government has delivered 2 budgets which have weakened our economy. Taxes are up, and electricity and gas bills are getting out of control.
Order.
We have higher inflation than the US, France and Germany. Australians are worse off today than when you came to government 13 months ago. When will the Prime Minister accept responsibility for his economy-destroying policies?
I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question.
The member for Deakin will cease interjecting.
The fact is that under this government, under this government,
Leader of the Opposition has asked his question. Order.
Under this government, what we have is turned a $78 billion deficit in the first projected surplus in 15 years of $4.2 billion. We have the strongest jobs growth in the first year of any new government. 465,000 new jobs created, and for the first time we have more than 14 million Australians have a job. We have a record number of women in jobs and more women working full-time. We have pay packets growing at the fastest rate in more than a decade. We have the gender pay gap has fallen to a historic low of 13.3%. And the Leader of the Opposition raises international comparisons, and I'm happy to do so. The GDP growth of Australia is higher than all of the G7 countries, higher than Canada, higher than France, higher than Germany, higher than Italy, higher than Japan, higher than the United Kingdom and higher than the United States. The participation rate is higher than all of those countries as well. And employment growth is higher than every single country in the G7. And we are the only country that is in surplus. All G7 countries are in deficit. And of course, because of this government, more than 1 million Australians will pay less for childcare next month. 11 million Australians will pay less to see a doctor. Because of our budget, another 6 million Australians will pay less for their medicines. 480,000 Australians will pay zero for TAFE, pay nothing for TAFE. 5 million Australian families will get relief on their power bills, and 1 million small businesses will get relief as well. 111,000 households will pay less to make their houses more energy efficient. And of course, 250,000 aged care workers will get a pay rise. And people on the minimum wage will also pay more. This government has put forward a constructive budget. Those opposite still haven't put a costing on the one thing that they announced in their budget reply.
The call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What approaches have the Albanese Labor government changed to make budget management more responsible, and why is this so important?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and to the member for Boothby. The Liberals and Nationals made a mess of the budget and we are cleaning it up. Our responsible budget management is rebuilding our nation's finances and leading to smaller deficits and less debt and lower interest costs. We are returning 87% of revenue upgrades. We found $40 billion in savings and reprioritisations compared to $0 in the last budget of those opposite. We are forecasting a budget improvement of more than $143 billion over the 4 years to 2025-26 from the last budget they delivered. The improvements in the budget are a direct and a deliberate result of the actions taken by this Albanese Labor government. And as we've said, a stronger budget isn't just an end in itself, it's a foundation for everything we want to do for our people and for our society. It allows us to provide responsible cost of living relief to people who are doing it tough and to invest in the capabilities of our people and the capacity of our economy into the future. And importantly, our responsible budget takes pressure off inflation, a fact acknowledged by the Reserve Bank Governor. Now, a week before the budget was handed down on the 9th of May, the member for Hume issued a press release that said the test for this budget will be to balance the budget. Well, we are now 8 days before the end of the financial year and we are on track to deliver the first surplus in 15 years, Mr Speaker. Those opposite were forecasting a $78 billion deficit for the same year. And what's clear is that we wouldn't be anywhere near a surplus without our spending restraint, our savings and our decision to return most of the revisions to revenue to the bottom line. Now, when those opposite came to office, they promised a string of surpluses. They said, and I quote, "We will deliver a surplus in our first year and every year after that." And we all know how that turned out, Mr Speaker. They went 0 for 9 donuts, Mr Speaker. The great irony of Australian politics is the Liberals talk about surpluses and the Greens talk about social housing, and in the last decade neither has delivered any of either. In fact, Mr Speaker, those opposite delivered more consecutive deficits than any government since the 1920s. They delivered the biggest deficits since Federation, Mr Speaker. It was a decade of debt, a decade of deficit and a decade of disappointment, Mr Speaker, and that's because surpluses aren't made of mugs and they're not made of memes. They're delivered through the responsible economic management and spending restraint that would be unrecognisable to the economic failures who sit over there, Mr Speaker. We take responsibility for cleaning up the mess that they left of the budget.
Order. There is far too much noise in the chamber. Even if it's the last day, everyone needs to take a breath. So I can hear from the member for Riverina.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Professor Megan Davis, a member of the government's referendum working group, has written of The Voice that, quote, "The Voice will be able to speak to the Reserve Bank." Minister, would The Voice have the power to offer advice to the Reserve Bank on interest rates?
Order. Order. The member for Wannon will cease interjecting. The member for Riverina was heard in silence. So shall the Minister for Indigenous Australians, who has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Reserve Bank is independent. Not even the Prime Minister can influence the Reserve Bank.
Order. 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 I give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you. Thank you.
The member for Deakin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to protect and restore nature while rewarding landholders for their good environmental work? And what has been the response?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Yes, nature.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Wills for his question and for his support for the Nature Repair Bill, which passed through the House of Representatives last night. This is a bill that's designed to make it easier for Australian businesses, individuals, philanthropists to invest in projects like planting trees, restoring stream banks, getting rid of feral species, dealing with weeds on farmers' properties, making our land and our beaches and our seas more resilient. It's great for farmers, for First Nations communities, for other landholders that have already been doing this work on their land, protecting and restoring nature. It's a way of getting more money into nature restoration. Mr Speaker, no government has done more for the environment or for climate change than this government. No government has invested more in the environment than the Albanese Labor government. This project is not designed to replace government effort, but to enhance it, to join with it, to better improve nature. That's why the World Wildlife Fund, for example, have said they support initiatives that recognise and reward real improvements in conservation outcomes. It's why it's supported by the Northern Land Council, by Landcare, by Farmers for Climate, the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, by the National Farmers Federation. So I want to thank Labor MPs and those on the crossbench that worked so constructively to pass this legislation. But I want to say, Mr Speaker, that I am
The call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the member was trying to impute that there is a subsidy for fossil fuel.
Rental homes to be built in Australia. And then, of course, our announcement last weekend of the $2 billion social housing accelerator, blocking it because, of course, they no longer believe in future funds, even though they set some up. And then, of course, we've got the Greens political party who are blocking it for something that actually cannot be delivered, Mr Speaker. Everybody in this place knows that in the Constitution it shows very clearly that we do not have the power to implement a rent freeze, very clearly. Secondly, of course, Mr Speaker, the experts and the evidence tells all of us that it will make the situation worse, that it won't work. Indeed, the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute said, and I quote, "It won't work because it will discourage new investments, so supply will not be brought on." And then, of course, you've got Professor Graham Samuel, the former head of the ACCC, who said they should understand that the fundamental problem is we've got a lack of supply. And he went on to say, the moment you put a rental cap in place, you just simply exacerbate the supply problem. Mr Speaker, on this side of the House, we do want to get on with the job of building more homes. We want to deal with supply as I outlined. We also, of course, want to support the Australians that are renting. And we're doing that through the National Cabinet with renters' rights. We did that in our last budget with our increases to the Commonwealth Rent Assistance, the 15% increase, the largest increase in more than 30 years. While we are delivering, of course, those on the other side want to keep delaying. They want to keep blocking this important legislation. They can keep blocking it for things that are impossible. We're going to keep on delivering for Australians that need it most.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Minister, if The Voice provides advice to the government to change or abolish Australia Day, will the government follow that advice?
The Assistant Treasurer, the Minister for Cyber Security and Home Affairs, will cease interjecting. The Deputy was heard in silence. The Minister will be heard in silence, and she has the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer to my previous answer on this matter yesterday. And to provide context, Mr Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the 4 land councils from the Northern Territory that join us today. Mr Samuel Bush-Blunsey from the Northern Land Council, Matthew Palmer from Central Land Council, Gibson Farmer from Tiwi and Thomas Amagula from Mandaliaqua. They have come together at Barunga and issued the Barunga Voice Declaration, which they presented to the Prime Minister this morning. In part it says, we need to be heard and urge our fellow Australians to stand with us and vote yes in the forthcoming referendum for the sake of a better future for all of us. A better future for all of us.
The call to order. Give it order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to improve access to affordable housing, and why has the Housing Australia Future Fund failed to pass?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Gilmore for her question. And of course the government does have a comprehensive plan for housing and we've been acting. Just on Saturday we announced our $2 billion social housing accelerator. And we want that to add to our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, which has failed to pass the Senate. I was heartened to see this morning a media release, Mr Speaker. It came across my desk today and it said this: Greens set to negotiate with government on housing bill. Said the Greens are ready to negotiate in good faith to get the public, community and affordable housing Australia desperately needs. And I thought, you beauty, Mr Speaker. They've woken up to themselves. But then I saw the date on the bottom. The 4th of October 2022. Since then it's been clear there's no good faith here, Mr Speaker. Just a political party driven by self-interest which is prepared to declare in writing, this parliamentary conflict helped create the space for a broader campaign. That's prepared to declare, while Parliament has debated the HAF, the Greens have also launched a national door-knocking campaign targeted at Labor-held federal electorates for a solution. But Australians will also reject the phony political conflict being waged by the Greens political party. You can't say you support public housing while you're voting against it. You can't say that you're serious about protecting vulnerable.
Order. The Assistant Treasurer will remain silent for this answer. Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I addressed this issue yesterday and the day before, and I am responsible for what I say.
Order.
The referendum is about two things. It's about recognition and it's about listening. It's about making a practical difference, and I simply will not engage in the style of politics that we're seeing today.
Call to the member. Order. Call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Health. How will the Voice provide better opportunities to close the gap in health outcomes for First Nations people?
Give a call to the House will come to order because I want to hear from the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for his question, because later this year Australians will have the chance to vote to change our constitution to recognise the place of First Nations peoples in this country. More than 30 years after the High Court finally swept aside that long-standing fiction that this was vacant land when Europeans arrived more than 200 years ago. Mr Speaker, Australians will get a chance to give shape to that recognition through a voice to the Parliament and to the Executive. And I can't think of a more important area where we should listen to that voice than in health. For too many years, Mr Speaker, the Parliament and health ministers of both political persuasions have been confronted with the appalling health gaps that exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Health challenges that unarguably impact Indigenous Australians differently, to use the language of the Attorney-General, but also some health challenges that are largely unknown to non-Indigenous Australians. Challenges like rheumatic heart disease, which was largely eradicated from developed countries 50 years ago. It's a disease, Mr Speaker, of grinding poverty. Doctors in our major cities will likely never see a case of rheumatic heart disease, but the rates in remote Aboriginal communities are among the highest in the world, higher even than in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr Speaker, these health gaps are reflected most starkly through 8 fewer years of life system, and in some cases they're frankly getting much, much worse. While cancer deaths very happily declined overall by 10% last decade across Australia, they actually increased by 10% for Indigenous Australians. Mr Speaker, none of this is news. We've all known about this for years, and we have all worked hard to close the gap. But with the best of intentions and with substantial investment, The current approach simply isn't working, and in the few areas where it is, I'm confident that a voice to the Parliament and, frankly, a voice to the Health Minister will help find better, more effective, practical ways to close the gap and to allow Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to...
Order. Order. Member for Page. Members on my left.
It is possible to have a question that is more directly seeking a legal opinion than the one that was just asked. But that's one of them.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Interjected. I don't know how clear I can be to her. She is warned and will remain silent for the rest of question time. The Prime Minister in continuation.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Victorian Premier certainly knows we're regional. Our Infrastructure Minister, who has responsible for cities and regional development policy as well. It is about working with the three levels of government. What we know is that many of these communities as well are suffering from a failure to be able to fill the labour markets that are available because there is enormous growth in these communities. So I thank the member for her question.
The First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War,
Order.
Fisher,
Order.
Curtin, Hawke, and as our country faces the most complex strategic circumstances since the Second World War, another Labor government, the Albanese government, is committed to keeping Australians safe.
Order. Members on my left and right. Warned alongside the member for Gippsland. Two of you.
And I'm sure that the incoming government, the Minns government, I'll certainly raise the issues.
Subsequently. The initial report detailed how Mr Robert personally $174 million awarded to Indian software giant Infosys. Mr Robert met with Infosys, 60 client, in December 2019 at the Gold Coast home of his political fundraiser,